Hello students, today we are going to deal with the fluids present in our body. The fluids which are present in our body are considered as a body fluids. We are going to see the body fluids and their circulation in our body. Of course, all the fluids are not circulating in our body, but definitely few fluids in our body are the circulating fluids. When I talk about the body fluids, the fluids which are present in our body contributes to almost 60% of the body weight. These fluids are classified into intracellular fluids and extracellular fluids. When I say about the intracellular fluids are within the cell. Within the cell means we have a cell and inside the cell we have a protoplasm. So I can regard the protoplasm or the fluid in the protoplasm as the intracellular fluid. This fluid is found to be similar in majority of the cells. As we can see, the fluid is one or the intracellular fluid composition generally alter from cell to cell depending upon their functional ability. What the cell is doing, what kind of function it is carrying out, depending upon that, the intracellular fluid composition may vary a bit, but under normal given conditions, the intracellular fluid will have the constant constitution. Intracellular fluid, as we have discussed, are the part of the protoplasm. Generally, they circulate within the cell. So, we can't say that totally they are not circulating, but they are limited in the cell. They will move in the cell, but they will be limited to the cell. Now, the other type of the fluid that we have is extracellular fluid. As the name suggests, extracellular, that is, it is outside the cell. When I say it is outside the cell, it may be just lining to the cell or it may be moving around the cell, and therefore this extracellular fluids are our topic. The extracellular fluids that we have in our body are the tissue fluids. What do I mean by the tissue fluids? Inside the body there are certain group of the cells which we consider as a tissue. To keep this tissue moist, to maintain the moisture of this tissue, or rather to prevent the dehydration of the tissue, we have the fluid part, and that fluid part within the tissue is called as the extracellular tissue fluid. This tissue fluid is surrounding the tissue or is enclosed by the intracellular spaces in the tissue. So intracellular spaces of the tissue contain the fluid which we can regard as tissue fluid. Then we have the plasma. We all know that we have a blood which is considered as the softest connective tissue. The blood is the softest connective tissue. Rather, we can say that the blood is a fluid connective tissue. So we can call blood as fluid connective tissue. Now this fluid connective tissue or the blood contains major part, that is plasma, and that plasma from the blood is considered as the fluid which is extracellular, just because within the blood we have the plasma, and in the plasma we are going to have the blood cells. So blood cells within the plasma, so plasma becomes extracellular fluid for the blood cells. Then we have the lymph or the plasma present in the lymph, okay, and then we have the digestive fluid, various enzymes that we have in the body during digestion process, or the digestive juices that we have in the alimentary canal are considered as digestive fluids. The fluids in the urinary tract are also considered as a body fluid. The fluid in the urinary tract mainly comprises of the filtrate, that is containing the nitrogenous waste, or the urine itself can be regarded as an extracellular fluid. So these are the extracellular fluids which are normally present in the body. Major of them are moving. The specialized extracellular fluid are the fluids which are present in the special areas of the body, and they are not at all circulating fluids. Rather, they do not form the part of the circulating fluids in our body. These extracellular fluid which are specialized are found in the special areas. Especially if you look, we have a synovial fluid. What is synovial fluid? Synovial fluid is a fluid that we generally find in the spaces between the articulating bones. If we observe the perfectly movable joints in our body, they have a lot of mobility. Some of them may be moving in a 360 degree, like our hand joint, rather shoulder, body and shoulder joint, we can move it in the 360 degree rotation, and then certain we have as a 180 degree rotation, that is what we can call as a 180 degree movement, that is in the elbow joint. So these joints that we have, they are movable joints. So when I talk about the movable joints, these movable joint has a mobility because the articulating bones are not completely joined to each other. The two articulating bones leave the space which is called as synovial space. This synovial space is guarded by the membranes called as synovial membrane, and these space are not empty. The spaces are enclosed by the fluid called as synovial fluid, which nourishes the cartilage present on the articulating bone. So definitely this fluid is not going to move out of our joint, and therefore it is called as the specialized extracellular fluid which is not going to circulate. Similarly, we have CSF. What is CSF? CSF is called as cerebrospinal fluid. When I talk about the cerebrospinal fluid, this cerebrospinal fluid is a nourishing fluid that we find in the cranium and spinal cord. Rather, it surrounds the cranium as well as surround the spinal cord. This fluid is present in the cranium or the brain box. At the same time, this is also present in the neural canals of vertebrae. This fluid is cerebrospinal fluid and is nourishing. Not only it nourishes the nervous tissue and spinal cord, but at the same time it helps in absorbing the shock, especially in the cranium, which protects our brain. These fluids are extracellular specialized fluids, not at all circulating. Then we have intraocular fluids. What do I mean by intraocular fluids? Intraocular fluids are the fluids that are present in our eyeball. As I said, entirely our body is kept moist from inside. Rather, the fluid prevents desiccation of the organs and tissues. In our eyeball, we have the two chambers in which we keep the fluid which has a multiple function. The fluids that are present are aqueous humor and vitreous humor, and these are present in the two chamber of eyeball, that is aqueous chamber and vitreous chamber. Thus it becomes intraocular, inside the eyeball. This fluid is also specialized extracellular fluid. Mechanical shock absorbance is the quality that these fluids generally possess. The last that we find over here in the specialized extracellular tissue is serous fluid. What do I mean by serous fluid? This fluid is present in the membrane covering the special organs. For example, the heart is covered by the membranous structure called as pericardium. Our lungs are covered by the membranous structure called as a pleural membrane. And these organs like heart and lungs, they have a special protection with the help of the pericardium and pleural membrane. These membranes encloses a cavity which is filled by the fluid. If it is a pericardial membrane, then the fluid is called as pericardial fluid. If it is a pleural membrane, the fluid is called as pleural fluid. Thus we have the serous fluid as the fluid present in the pericardium as well as in the pleura. All these are called as a transcellular fluid. They move across the cell, means from where they are produced they come into the cavity, but they don't circulate. So their movement is only from the cell where they are produced to the cavity where they are going to be lodged in. So that's why they are called as a transcellular fluid. Now when we have seen so many fluids, our major concentration comes to the blood, which is our primary circulating fluid. Because if you observe, majority of the fluids that we have on the board are not going to circulate to a greater extent. But the blood has maximum mobility. The blood is the fluid tissue which circulates within our body. So that brings us to the concept of the circulating fluid, and that brings us to the blood. Along with the blood, we also have the lymphatic fluid which will be circulating in our body. So primary circulation of the body fluid is for blood and for lymph. So for us, the primary circulating body fluids are blood and lymph. We are going to study further as the circulation of blood and lymph. In the further chapter, we will study the circulation. But before how the blood is going to move in our body, let us come to the topic of what is blood made up of. Let us now consider the blood and its composition. We told that blood is our primary circulating fluid. When we talk about the primary circulating fluid, blood moves inside our body. The blood which is going to move inside our body basically comprises of the two major components, that is plasma and formed particles. Plasma is a pale yellow color transparent clear fluid part of the blood. This fluid part comprises almost 55% of the total blood. So from the whole blood that we have, 55% of the whole blood is made up of plasma. Whereas the formed particles are 45% of the total blood. So the 45% of the total blood that we have is going to contain the corpuscles or the formed particles. These are called as corpuscles or cells of the blood. As we said that blood is going to be called as a tissue. So when we talk about the tissue, we are going to have the cells as well. And that cellular part of the tissue of the blood is the formed particle. When we talk about the plasma, plasma consists of, if we consider the composition of the plasma consists of 90 to 92% pure water. So the maximum amount of the water that we find in the blood is accumulated in the plasma. Therefore, plasma has maximum fluidity. Along with the water, we are going to have in the plasma the minerals. Generally, the salts are present in the ionic form. Potassium salts will be there, carbonate salts, bicarbonate, sodium. They are found in the blood in the form of the ions, and this water helps for the ionization of the salts. So this minerals which we are talking about are all the inorganic minerals that we find in the blood. It can be calcium, it can be potassium, sodium. So all these, even iodine, they can become the inorganic material of the plasma. Then we come to the nutrient. Nutrients are basically the organic compound present in the plasma. They are the organic components of the plasma. The organic components of the plasma that we have over here are the glucose, lipids, then amino proteins. So they are going to be considered as a organic or the nutritive part of the plasma. Then we have plasma proteins. The plasma proteins are the basic proteins that we require for the viscosity of the plasma. Generally, they are going to form the viscosity. The plasma protein, if we consider, they contribute to the 3% of the plasma. The plasma protein that are primary present are albumin, then we have globulin, and we have fibrinogen. So if we observe the proteins that are present in the plasma, they are the very, very basic simple proteins that we have in the form of albumin, globulin and fibrinogen. These are going to contribute to total 3% of the plasma that we are going to have. They are basically responsible for the viscosity of the blood. They are basically acting as acid-base buffers in the blood. So they are of quite important. Along with them, we have the immunoglobulins. Again, a protein part of the plasma. Immunoglobulins are the defense body produced by our body. In our body, the lymphocytes produce antibodies. These antibodies are called as immunoglobulins. These immunoglobulins are our defense mechanism. They are going to be present in the plasma. So the body defense is contributed by antibodies and they are also the part of the plasma. Along with the excretory nitrogenous waste, we all know that we have the excretory products produced by various metabolic activity in the cell. These excretory products produced by the various metabolic activity in the cell are taken up into the blood or rather are exchanged with the blood by the cell. Therefore, in the blood we will definitely find the excretory waste. Excretory waste generally over here comprises of urea, very, very small amount of uric acid, then creatinine, hippuric acid. So generally we are not going to produce large amount of hippuric acid, rather we don't produce hippuric acid, which we'll be learning further in the excretory system. But definitely small amount of uric acid and urea majorly are contributed as a human excretory waste. Along with that, we have a dissolved gases. As we know, the blood is under certain amount of pressure, and with that pressure, some of the gases like carbon dioxide, oxygen, nitrogen, they may be occurring in the dissolved form, but whatever dissolution of the gases is going to take place, that will take place in the fluid part of the blood, and that is called as plasma. In the cells, especially RBC, there is no dissolution, there is a combination. Chemical reaction takes place for the gases to bind with the cell. But the dissolved gases we will find in the plasma. Along with that, we have hormones. Various hormones. We know what are hormones. Hormones are the secretion of the endocrine glands. We have called endocrine glands as a ductless gland. Why we call them as a ductless gland? The reason is they are going to pour their secretion directly into the blood, and therefore they are called as endocrine gland. And these endocrine glands are going to pour their secretion hormones into the blood, and therefore blood is going to have the hormones. These hormones travel along with the blood in our body and they go and affect the target organs. After that, we have anticoagulants. What are anticoagulants? See, under the normal condition, the blood inside our body is not going to form the clots. Rather, blood is prevented from forming the clots, and therefore we require anticoagulant in the blood. The normal anticoagulant that we have in the blood is called as heparin. Heparin is an anticoagulant in the blood. This heparin is going to prevent the clotting of the blood under normal circulation process. Rather, forming the clot inside the body is considered as a specific condition which can be symptom of various diseases. And therefore, under normal condition in our blood, clots will be absent. And to keep this, or rather to prevent the clots from forming in our normal circulating blood, we have anticoagulant heparin present in the blood. Along with that, various vitamins which are used by the cell or other are transported to the cell are present in the plasma. Enzymes which are certainly coming in the blood. Along with that, we also have the molecules like sugars. At the same time, in the plasma, we have the serum. Rather, I can divide the plasma into serum. Now, what is serum? Before I explain you the serum, let me first explain you the clotting. I told you that under normal condition, my blood is not going to clot. But definitely when there is a cut or the wound, the blood is going to clot. Now, what makes the blood to clot after the cut? Because we already know that the clotting in the normal circulation is prevented by the heparin. So, who is going to help in clotting the blood after the cut is there? This is carried out by the series of the factors called as clotting factors. These clotting factors are present in the plasma. These clotting factors help the blood to clot when there is wound or cut. Whenever there is cut or wound, the clotting factor or the clotting mechanism are activated. Under the clotting mechanism, these clotting factors come into the picture and they help in clotting the blood, thus preventing the heavy loss of the blood. These clotting factors are present in the plasma. The plasma without clotting factor is called as serum. So, what is serum for us? Serum is a plasma without the clotting factor. So, if I take the serum, I will not be able to have the clotting factor inside the serum, because serum contains only pure plasma without any clotting factors into it. So, that is about the plasma. Plasma, as I said, gives the fluidity to the blood. Plasma prevents the desiccation of the various organs. It is the plasma which keeps the blood moving, and it is a plasma who carry out the major exchange. That brings us to the part called as formed particle. What are these formed particles and what they are going to do? If the major circulating nutrients and the excretory product are in the plasma, then what are these formed particles are going to do? If we come first to the RBC, if you observe, we have divided the formed particles or the corpuscles or the cells into the three major categories. We have RBCs, WBCs and platelets. The RBCs are called as red blood cell. And these red blood cells or RBCs are also called as erythrocyte. Erythros means red color. Cytes means cell. So when I say about the erythrocytes, they are the red blood cells. These erythrocytes are present in the large quantity. They are around 4.5 to 5 million per millimeter of blood, rather cubic millimeter of the blood. Now, how I am going to describe 4.5 to 5 million range, which I should consider as a normal range? So, it is concluded that generally in the female, we have less number of the RBCs compared to the male. In the males, we have almost 5 million per cubic millimeter of the blood, whereas in the normal female, I consider 4.5 millions per millimeter cube of blood. When I say normal condition, because the number of the RBCs can be increased or decreased depending upon the physiological condition of our body. During various illness, this number can be affected. Therefore, under normal condition, we expect that per millimeter cube of the blood will contain 4.5 to 5 millions of RBC. These RBCs are produced by bone marrow. What is bone marrow? Bone marrow is present. It is a marrow tissue which is present in the cavity of the long bones, and therefore it is called as bone marrow. There are two types of bone marrow, red bone marrow and yellow bone marrow. RBCs are generally produced by red bone marrow. This process of production of the RBC is called as erythropoiesis. The erythropoiesis is carried out by bone marrow. Therefore, bone marrow is called as erythropoietic tissue. In the infant stages, the RBCs can be produced by liver as well as spleen. But as we grow older or as we become adult, the entire production of RBC is under the control of bone marrow. How many RBCs to be released? That depend upon how the hemopoiesis is going to take place. Now the erythropoiesis is under hormonal control. The hormone that controls the production of RBC is called as erythropoietin hormone. This erythropoietin hormone is produced by cells in the kidney. They produce erythropoietin, and this erythropoietin is going to stimulate the bone marrow cells to produce RBC. So, erythropoiesis is a process of forming the erythrocytes, and this is carried out by erythropoietin. Sometime under the panic condition, our body may produce excess of RBCs. These excess of RBCs are not required, and therefore they go to the spleen where they are broken down. Therefore, the spleen is called as the graveyard of RBC. So basically, if you observe, we require erythropoietin to carry out production of RBC. But it is not the only factor that is required, because along with that, the major component that I require is hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a iron porphyrin complex. Hemoglobin is an iron porphyrin complex. Chemically, it is a conjugate protein made up of the heme molecule and the globin molecule. Hemoglobin molecule is the heaviest molecule, contributing around 58,000 of the molecular weight. So 58,000 unit of molecular weight, that is the heaviest weight that we find in the hemoglobin molecule. Hemoglobin molecule is a quaternary protein structure which is formed of a conjugate protein, heme and globin. This heme is nothing but the iron porphyrin complex. So heme is an iron porphyrin complex, and this heme combines with the globin to form hemoglobin. So for me, for the production of RBC along with erythropoietin, the amount of the hemoglobin available also is under consideration. This hemoglobin is, rather we can say, packed into the RBC. If you observe the RBCs produced are nucleated. So when the RBCs are formed, they are the normal cells which are having the nucleus. But as they mature, the nucleus from the RBC is lost. The nucleus is lost to make the space for hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is accommodated inside the RBC by allowing the evacuation of the nucleus. Therefore, in the matured RBCs, you will not see nucleus. But the maturation of the RBC is not under the control of hemopoietin. Hemopoietin is only required for the production of RBC. The maturation of the RBC is under the control of folic acid, vitamin B12, presence of iron in the body. So all this is contributing to maturation of RBC. Once matured, the RBC come into circulation. Immatured RBC are never brought into circulation. Immature RBCs are those RBCs which are nucleated RBCs. They become enucleated and the space for the nucleus is accommodated by hemoglobin molecule and the RBC is matured. The matured RBCs are brought into circulation. These matured RBC are 4.5 to 5 million per millimeter cube of the blood in the normal human body. These RBCs are having a specific lifespan. The lifespan of the RBC is normally 120 days. 120 days is a normal lifespan of RBC. The RBC produced will remain in the circulation for 120 days, after which they are destroyed in the body. The destruction of the exhausted RBCs also take place in the spleen, and therefore spleen is rightly called as the graveyard of the body, where destruction of the RBCs take place, or you can say RBCs rest in peace in the spleen. When we talk about the RBC production, we have used the term erythropoiesis. Formation of the RBC with the help of erythropoietin hormone is called as erythropoiesis. I told you the normal range of the RBC. But sometimes there is excessive production of RBC which is abnormal. Or sometimes there is less production of RBC which is again an abnormal condition. The lesser production of the RBC is called as erythrocytopenia. Erythrocytopenia. So I have erythrocytopenia. Erythrocytopenia is a term that we use for abnormal decrease in the RBC. If the RBCs are extensively increased, then it is called as erythrocytosis. So we have the two terms erythrocytopenia and erythrocytosis. Erythrocytosis is a rise in the RBC abnormally, whereas erythrocytopenia is an abnormal fall in the count of RBC, which is again under condition. We can call them as a symptom. They are not the diagnosis altogether. They are the symptoms which indicates that there is some problem with the body. Generally, RBCs are required to carry oxygen and carbon dioxide. The hemoglobin present in the RBC, the hemoglobin that is present in the RBC is going to combine with oxygen. The hemoglobin combines with oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin. This is a combination. They don't form altogether a new compound. They form only the binding of oxygen. So hemoglobin acts as a substance that binds the oxygen. They don't keep the whatever oxygen we inhale from the air is exchanged in the lungs. In the lungs, the molecular oxygen is made available. But this free molecular oxygen do not stay as a free molecular oxygen in the blood, but combines with the hemoglobin to form oxyhemoglobin. And this leads to the formation of oxyhemoglobin, and oxygen is carried in the form of oxyhemoglobin in the body. At the tissue, the reversible reaction takes place and oxygen will dissociate from the hemoglobin. As we have discussed about the RBC, we now know that RBC are the most important structure or most important corpuscles in the blood. They are going to carry the oxygen from the lungs to the cells, and from the cells they take the carbon dioxide. As we have discussed that hemoglobin is going to bind with oxygen and I get oxyhemoglobin. This phenomenon is going to take place in the lung. Whereas at the tissue level, the oxygen will dissociate from the hemoglobin, and that will be made available to the cell. So oxygen is transported with the help of RBC. I have told you all that there will be dissolved gases, but of course oxygen is not dissolved on a very large quantity. Rather, the temperature and the pressure is not significant enough to dissolve oxygen. So basic amount of the oxygen that is carried out, or rather that is transported to the cells or the tissue, that comes through oxyhemoglobin. Carbon dioxide from the tissues is definitely carried out in the dissolved form, as well as the small amount of the carbon dioxide is combining with the RBC and they form carbaminohemoglobin. So hemoglobin combines with oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin and combines with carbon dioxide to form carbaminohemoglobin. That is how oxygen is transported by hemoglobin in the body. So that is about the RBCs that we have. Along with RBCs, let us come to the WBCs. WBCs are called as leukocyte. Leukos means colorless. Cyte means cell. So they are colorless cells. As they are colorless cells, they are called as white blood cells. So WBC stands for white blood cells. They are also produced by hemopoiesis. They are produced in the body by hemopoiesis, and the hemopoiesis is carried out generally by the yellow bone marrow. These WBCs are 6,000 to 8,000 per millimeter cube of blood. So they will be present compared to the RBCs. If you observe, WBCs are less in number. The red color of the blood is because of the RBC. But if you look at the individual RBC, it is not red in color, because the amount of the hemoglobin present in the single RBC doesn't have a capacity to impart red color to the RBC. RBCs are slightly yellowish in color. But collectively, when I have 5 million or 4.5 million of them, then definitely they appear red in color. But if you observe white blood cells or leukocytes or white blood corpuscles, they are absolutely transparent. They are 6,000 to 8,000 per millimeter of blood, rather per cubic millimeter of blood. White blood cells are generally going to form the defense of our body. White blood cells and red blood cells, they have a peculiar function in the body. Red blood cells help in transport of oxygen, whereas white blood cells carry out defense in our body. They also have a specific lifespan depending upon that who are being produced. Generally their lifespan is from few days to few weeks. Most of the time they die during the action. So whenever they are performing the action or they are helping the physiology to maintain the defense of the body, they are destroyed. If we observe RBC are totally non-motile structure. That means RBC are not going to move in the blood. But these WBC, they have a capacity to exhibit amoeboid movement. And therefore, they have an ability to undergo dipedesis. What do I mean by dipedesis? Dipedesis is a phenomenon where the where the WBCs can squeeze themselves out through the capillary wall, which is not possible for the RBCs, because RBCs cannot move out through the capillary wall. They are not able to squeeze themselves, nor they are able to move on their own. They have a rigid structure and they are non-motile. But WBCs are motile, they can move and they are quite flexible molecule. They can squeeze through the capillary walls during diapedesis. WBCs, depending upon their cytoplasmic structure, can be further classified as granulocytes. We have granulocytes and agranulocytes. What do I mean by granulocytes? Granulocytes are those in which the cytoplasm is granular, whereas agranulocytes are those in which the cytoplasm is comparatively clear. So we have a WBCs classified as agranulocytes and granulocytes. Abnormal increase in them is also a symptomatic approach. For example, if the WBCs are decreased in number abnormally, then our immunity is exposed. Rather, our immunity is at the stake. We lose our immunity when WBC decrease extensively. The decrease in the WBC is called as leukocytopenia. So I have a leukocytopenia. It is an abnormal decrease in the WBC. Leukocytopenia is abnormal fall in the WBC. But just like abnormal rise in the RBC, we also have abnormal rise in the WBC. The abnormal rise in the WBC is called as leukocytosis. So we have erythrocytosis and leukocytosis, both the terms used for abnormal rise in erythrocytes and leukocytes respectively. Similarly, we have a erythrocytopenia and leukocytopenia, which are the term generally used to describe the abnormal fall in RBC and WBC. These conditions are totally considered as symptomatic. Means abnormal rise is there, I can consider certain infection. Abnormal fall is there, I have to be very precaution that there might not be a bone marrow depression. Under bone marrow depression, we may suffer from leukocytopenia and erythrocytopenia. Now, as we can say, WBC don't have a specific lifespan where they can be destroyed as they interact or as they undergo phagocytic action. That is what about the WBC, which we have to do in detail in the further part of the topic. Then we come to the platelets. Platelets are called as the thrombocytes. Thrombocytes are present in almost 1.5 lakhs to 3.5 lakhs per millimeter cube of blood. Platelets are formed by the process where the megakaryocytes undergo fragmentation. The mega means bigger, karyocytes matlab cells containing the carrion. So these are the megakaryocytes which will undergo fragmentation. The megakaryocytes undergo fragmentation to form the thrombocytes, which are also called as platelets. These platelets generally add up to the viscosity of the blood along with the plasma protein. These platelets, if abnormally decreased, it is called as thrombocytopenia. And if the platelets are abnormally increased, it is called as thrombocytosis. Very rarely we find thrombocytosis, but thrombocytopenia is definitely a symptomatic condition in majority of the cases like dengue, malaria. In dengue and malaria, the platelet counts fall down. The decrease in the platelets can be because of the destruction of the megakaryocytes or the RBCs. And therefore, the platelet count is an indication for parasitic infestation. Similarly, even the increase in the WBC can be considered as a parasitic infestation. There can be parasites, there can be certain antigen who is producing the large amount of the WBC as a response. So that is what we have about the formed particles in the blood. We have considered the blood along with its plasma and formed particle. This plasma and formed particle together form the blood, which is a fluid connective tissue and major part of our circulatory movement of the fluids. The blood circulatory system, that is what it brings us to. Blood circulatory system is the movement of this blood into the body. How this blood is put into the circulation then? For the circulation of this blood into our body, we require a pumping organ and tubes to carry the blood. The pumping organ in our body is known as heart. And the tubes are called as blood vessels. Heart along with the blood vessel contributes to our circulatory system. So that brings us to the part called as circulatory system.